In the summer of 1959, military engineers from the United States Army Corps of Engineers descended upon one of the most hostile environments on Earth, tasked with an assignment that sounded like pure science fiction. Roughly 138 to 150 miles inland from the northwestern coast of Greenland, they began to carve a subterranean city directly into an active glacier. At coordinates 77.1667 degrees north, 61.1333 degrees west, the operating conditions were unimaginably brutal. The teams worked roughly 6,600 feet above sea level, standing atop an immense ice sheet over 4,500 feet thick, enduring temperatures that routinely plummeted to minus 56 degrees Celsius. Using massive Swiss-built snow cutters, the engineers carved out a sprawling network of 21 to 26 parallel trenches deep into the ice, with the primary thoroughfare extending over 1,000 feet in length. This was Camp Century. Far below the desolate, freezing surface, this subterranean complex was outfitted with prefabricated facilities designed to sustain up to 200 personnel in relative comfort. The soldiers living inside the glacier had access to a fully functioning hospital, a hot dining hall, a movie theater, a library, a barbershop, and even a chapel. It was an unparalleled feat of polar engineering, a thriving, illuminated city buried in the dark, frozen expanse. But the true purpose of Camp Century was not what it appeared to be.
To understand how an underground American city ended up inside the sovereign territory of Denmark, you have to rewind to 1951. At the dawn of the Cold War, the United States and Denmark signed a mutual defense treaty regarding Greenland. This agreement enabled the creation of Thule Air Base on the northwestern coast, establishing a massive United States military footprint facing the Soviet Union across the Arctic Circle. 6 years later, in 1957, Danish Prime Minister H.C. Hansen took a highly controversial and entirely secret step. In quiet correspondence with the American ambassador, Hansen secretly authorized the storage of United States nuclear weapons in Greenland. This covert green light set the stage for operations led by the Polar Research and Development Center, the military organization directing Arctic-based testing. Thule Air Base soon became the massive logistical staging point for an even more ambitious push inward, directly onto the ice sheet itself. The military required an isolated proving ground, a place where they could test new, radical concepts for surviving and operating in the deep Arctic. With Hansen's secret blessing, the ice sheet was now officially open for business.
Building a high-tech city under the ice required power, and diesel fuel alone could not meet the demands of Camp Century. The solution was the PM-2A, a prototype portable nuclear reactor. Getting this reactor to the site was a grueling logistical nightmare. Reactor components, weighing hundreds of tons in total, had to be transported 138 miles across the treacherous ice sheet from Thule Air Base. They were dragged on heavy tracked vehicles, moving at an agonizing speed of just 2 miles per hour, turning a relatively short geographic distance into grueling 70-hour non-stop overland convoys. But the effort was considered a strategic necessity. Once installed beneath the snow, the PM-2A was fueled by just 44 pounds of highly enriched uranium, yet it produced 1.56 megawatts of continuous electricity. It was the first portable nuclear reactor ever deployed by the United States military, and it brought Camp Century to life, powering the lights, the heating systems, the science labs, and the theater. For a brief moment in time, the United States had successfully established a fully self-contained, nuclear-powered settlement entombed within the dense layers of a remote Arctic glacier.
Publicly, the United States Army represented Camp Century purely as a polar scientific research station. They launched an extensive public relations campaign, inviting journalists to film the modern marvels of the complex, and even hosting American and Danish Boy Scouts at the base to demonstrate its peaceful, forward-looking mission. In 1960, The United States formally informed Denmark that the site was strictly dedicated to scientific exploration and construction testing. But declassified records have since confirmed that Camp Century was actually the prototype for something much darker, a highly classified United States military initiative known as Project Iceworm. The ultimate goal of Project Iceworm was staggering in its scale. The military planned to construct a massive 4,000-kilometer tunnel network beneath the Greenland ice sheet. Inside these frozen subterranean corridors, they intended to deploy 600 modified Minuteman nuclear missiles mounted on underground railway tracks. These nuclear warheads would be constantly moving beneath the ice, hidden from Soviet reconnaissance, and positioned well within striking range of the Soviet Union. Project Iceworm sought to turn Danish sovereign territory into a massive, hidden nuclear launch pad, all without the knowledge or consent of the broader Danish government.
But the architects of Project Iceworm had vastly underestimated the environment they were trying to conquer. The first signs of trouble emerged from the nuclear reactor itself. When the PM2A reactor went critical in late 1960, unexpected radiation leakage triggered a massive panic inside the ice. Engineers were forced into emergency construction, scrambling to build massive lead shielding and erecting makeshift barrier walls out of discarded fuel drums filled with a mixture of ice and sawdust. But a much larger, more unstoppable threat was slowly bearing down on the base. The engineers had treated the ice sheet like solid rock, but a glacier is not static. It is a fluid, dynamic force of nature. Almost immediately after construction, the immense weight and natural glacial movement caused rapid compression and violent deformation of the carefully carved ice trenches. The ceilings began to sag and the walls closed in. By 1962, the situation had become so severe that the deforming ice was threatening to crush the PM2A reactor entirely. Desperate workers were forced to manually lift the ceiling of the reactor room by 5 solid feet just to prevent the crushing weight of the glacier from making direct contact with the nuclear core.
The battle against the glacier was a losing one. By 1963, continuous measurements of the glacial movement rate definitively proved that the ice was warping far too rapidly to ever support a long-term subterranean railway. The constant deformation invalidated the entire feasibility of Project Iceworm. Realizing that the ice would inevitably crush the 4,000-kilometer rail network, the Joint Chiefs of Staff abruptly canceled Project Iceworm and ordered the PM2A reactor powered down. In 1964, the nuclear reactor was dismantled and carefully removed from the ice, and the base was transitioned back to basic summer-only diesel power. Finally, between 1966 and 1967, the United States Army officially abandoned Camp Century to the elements. They locked the doors and left, allowing the snow to bury the subterranean city. Ironically, while the military mission failed, the base's cover story yielded a massive scientific breakthrough. In 1969, Danish geophysicist Willy Dansgaard analyzed the ice cores that scientists had extracted at Camp Century, publishing foundational paleoclimatology findings that revolutionized our understanding of Earth's historical climate. The military left behind a failed doomsday weapon, but accidentally funded the birth of modern climate science. For decades, Camp Century was largely forgotten, quietly crushing under the immense pressure of the Arctic ice. The true nature of the base remained a closely guarded secret. It wasn't until 1997 that a report by the Danish Institute of International Affairs officially disclosed the reality of Project Iceworm and its nuclear history to a stunned Danish public. But the revelation of the past soon gave way to a deeply concerning realization about the future. When the United States Army abandoned the base in the late 1960s, they did not leave it empty. Entombed beneath the snow was the heavy infrastructure of the city, along with raw sewage, thousands of gallons of diesel fuel, and low-level radioactive water from the reactor's cooling systems. The military assumed the ice would safely lock the waste away forever. But in 2016,
a groundbreaking study led by William Colgan, a scientist at the Geological Survey of Denmark and Greenland, issued a stark warning. The study suggested that human-driven climate change was fundamentally altering the math that the military had relied upon, threatening to expose the toxic legacy of Camp Century to the open environment.
The fate of the toxic waste at Camp Century remains the subject of intense debate and fierce geopolitical friction. The 2016 climate study warned that net ablation at the site could melt the covering ice by 2090, eventually releasing the trapped chemical and radioactive waste into local ecosystems. However, more recent climate modeling in 2021, backed by a 2024 United States Government Accountability Office report, concluded that snowfall will actually continue to exceed surface melting well past 2100, suggesting the waste will remain safely entombed under an ever-thickening blanket of ice. Regardless of the timeline, the mere presence of the base has sparked an ongoing diplomatic standoff. Former Greenland Minister of Foreign Affairs, Vitis Kudjaukitsoq, has loudly called for immediate site cleanup and compensation, arguing the abandoned military waste violates the region's environmental integrity. But responsibility remains trapped in a legal gray area. The original 1951 bilateral treaty between the United States and Denmark provides no explicit agreement or obligation for environmental remediation. Ultimately, the story of Camp Century is a monument to Cold War hubris. The failure of Project Iceworm stemmed from the military's flawed interpretation of nature, treating a dynamic, constantly moving ice sheet as if it were a static geology suitable for rigid subterranean infrastructure. They believed they could carve a permanent battlefield into one of the most volatile landscapes on Earth, only to watch the ice slowly and silently take it back.